Hollywood Chamber PAC is dedicated to shaping impactful policy that strengthens our business community, promotes job growth, and drives economic prosperity. We work with elected officials to shape legislation that drives positive change and promotes economic growth. We invite you to become a valued partner of the Hollywood Chamber PAC by sponsoring our upcoming events. Learn more at hollywoodpac.org.
Are you ready for the Hollywood Chambers Accelerate?
Coaching sessions that help accelerate your business growth.
We break down complex issues in a short format.
From the principles of finance to marketing strategies that will propel your organization.
Learn from industry experts, tastemakers, and business leaders.
Gain knowledge and resources that foster growth and innovation.
The Hollywood Chambers Accelerate.
Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other streaming platforms. I am proud to introduce today's speaker, Lucas Poles.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Lucas is the president of Tech Coast Angels in Los Angeles, one of the nation's largest angel networks. He is also the chairman of the board for Spark XYZ. Previously, Lucas worked at ADP, where he successfully rolled out 2 technology-driven national pilots. In addition, Lucas currently writes for Forbes and does speaking engagements around Los Angeles. All right, let's jump into it. Lucas, tell me about Tech Coast Angels LA.
Sure. So, Tech Coast Angels, we've been around for probably just about 20 years now. We're one of the oldest angel groups actually in the nation. We're definitely the largest in Southern California, and we're probably top 5 overall across the U.S. LA itself has about 150 members, so with a very diverse set of backgrounds, all accredited investors, and we make investments into early stage startups. So pre-seed and seed, I'd say that's valuations kind of 3 to 15 million right now. And yeah, we write checks and fund companies.
So Lucas, you also founded the company Spark XYZ. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So Spark XYZ is platform management software for incubators, accelerators, angel groups. When you have 150 members who are trying to come together and actually do due diligence, it can be very difficult to kind of corral all of those people into one kind of space. And so that's the point of Spark, is to be able to help alleviate a lot of our administrative functions.
In this episode, we'll delve into the critical topics of relationships, roles, and rewards, and how they impact the success of startups and small businesses. Get ready to learn about the pitfalls of co-funding with your friends and family, the benefits of clear role division, and the importance of discussing equity and rewards with your co-founders. Today's episode will provide insights into the best people to co-found with and the items that should be included in co-founder contracts to avoid potential conflicts and issues. So let's start with relationships. What are some of the pitfalls of co-funding a venture with friends and family?
So friends and family are the more difficult out of kind of the 4 sets of people that you end up wanting to co-found with. So I guess let's start with friends. So friends can be challenging to co-found with because you get early idea validation that you don't a lot of the time want or need. That's the first part. And then the second part that we'll end up diving into is around the tension that ends up building when you end up disagreeing on a topic. So the idea validation at the very beginning, when you're starting a venture-backed startup, a lot of the time you end up looking at you end up grabbing the closest people to you who are excited about the idea, generally your friends, because it's an easy way to get kind of the venture off of the ground. It's not a positive thing as the venture kind of goes through its iterations. And so just because you think it's a good idea, maybe your friend thinks it's a great idea, and you guys are saying, yeah, this is hurrah, hurrah, let's do it. The customers are the ones that end up telling you whether or not this is actually a great idea. Someone willing to actually end up paying for this. And so a lot of time you'll end up building a bunch of stuff and not going about it the right way. And then conflicts start arising. And so again, with friends, a lot of time, being in a startup is like being in a pressure cooker. You either have to grow or the startup ends up dying, and you have to make tough decisions along the way continuously. When you're co-founding with a friend, a lot of the time those tough decisions don't end up getting made, which can be challenging to say the least. The other part is that generally if you're friends with someone, generally you have the same interests, whether it's hobbies or a lot of time you end up having the same skill sets. And so that comes into creating a homogenous team, which we'll dive into a little bit later. If you have a team full of the exact same skills, the venture isn't going to be able to take off because you're going to be missing key components in actually starting a venture-backed company. Now, when you start looking at family, the challenges is that, again, you're in a pressure cooker, you have to make very tough decisions. A lot of times those decisions can't get made with family members. Like for me personally, I could never fire my mom. Like that would be a very difficult decision. Maybe she's not meeting the role. It wouldn't work out very well. The other kind of main one that you end up looking at is decisions that end up being made outside of the actual work environment. And so if you have, say, let's give an example. You're at a team meeting on a Friday, maybe later in the afternoon. Everyone agrees on one set path for what the next steps are and what you actually need to end up doing. The challenge is that the co-founders are maybe husband and wife or partners together, and they end up going home and they decide on a totally different course of action over the weekend. The team comes in hyped, ready on Monday morning to be able to go through and execute on the plan that they'd agreed on Friday, but the co-founding team has changed their mind and is totally sending them in a totally different direction, and they're not prepared for it. And so it starts creating this tension. The other part, and a lot of the stuff goes fine as long as everything's going well. But when things start going negatively, a lot of time that will start bleeding into the relationships. And so maybe the venture isn't going well and you and your partner go home and you start bringing these negative things home with you. And you never have the chance to actually reset from the bad day that you had within the actual office. And so there's no relaxation. There's no like, hey, let me reset and retool and rethink on the actual problem. It's just continuous. And again, that will lead to very negative outcomes. And so, yeah, family and friends can be challenging to be able to work with. I would say that it is not impossible. You can absolutely set up firewalls in between where you set specific rules that you have to follow around it. Like, hey, with your partner, if we are at the office, we talk XYZ, or if we go home, we're just not allowed to talk about it. And you can set guidelines around that. It can become difficult to follow as you kind of run through, but there are ways around it.
So why is it statistically better to co-fund with an acquaintance rather than friends or family?
We do not invest in as many startups that have the family orient. Friends, maybe less so. It's more of a check on really understanding their hierarchy and what ended up happening and how they did. But the family one can be significantly more difficult because as you kind of move through the later stages, you can always fire a co-founder. You can't. It's very difficult to fire your partners. We invest significantly less in that. And let me, I guess, put the caveat here that these are for venture-backed startups. So this is not a mom and pop shop where I've seen this work super, super well. It's not for the kind of the quote unquote lifestyle company, which is what it's called. This is for venture-backed, pressure cooker, high growth or fail kind of startups.
Wow, that's a great point. In your experience, who are the best people to co-fund with and why?
I would say the best people are previous coworkers. So you've already worked with them in a professional capacity, and so you truly understand how they work at the office. Some of the time, especially from a partner orient, you might not know how someone works in a professional setting, but because you've already been through that specific space, it tends to lead to significantly better outcomes.
Great. Let's get into roles. What is the main challenge founders routinely face when forming a homogeneous team, and why can it be problematic?
Sure. So a homogeneous team versus a non-homogeneous team. So a homogeneous team is a team that's put together with a bunch of people that have the exact same skill sets. So if you're starting a technology-oriented company and you bring in 3 co-founders and none of them are engineers who know how to code, but you're starting a technology company, that ends up becoming challenging to say the least. Non-homogeneous teams generally end up working out the best because you complement each other's, honestly, you complement each other's lack of skills in specific areas. So if you have a CEO that's good at sales, that's great. If you have an engineer that is great at engineering, perfect. That's really exactly what you want because you fill specific gaps and there's no real overlap. When you start getting overlap with a homogenous team, like, oh, I'm doing marketing and I want to do it this way, or no, I'm also a marketing person. I think that it should be done this way. And then again, you're getting more conflict at the early stages where it's really unnecessary.
That being said, what are the benefits of a clear division of labor, and how does it help keep everyone accountable?
Yeah, so this comes back to hierarchy versus egalitarian thought. So at the beginning, honestly, you can go kind of either way. You can go by consensus as you're kind of starting out through the whole team for the direction of the company, or you can go straight into hierarchy where it's kind of one person making the final decision. But again, if especially at the early stage, if you're going hierarchy, you need to be able to listen to all aspects to be able to make those decisions rather than the kind of authoritarian aspect. As you transition into the later stages of a company, you obviously absolutely have to go into a hierarchical structure. That's just the way that it ends up working out. If you look at Facebook now, they have 10 layers, right, of management from top to bottom, whereas when they first started, it was 7 people, 6 people in a room together making decisions. So those are the two different kind of spaces.
How do hierarchical and egalitarian approaches differ in their effectiveness, and what are the pros and cons of each approach in terms of company growth and decision making?
So the cons, obviously, of the hierarchy is, especially at the early stages, that if you're a CEO and you've put into place a hierarchy and you're not listening either to the people, generally it's the people that are closest to the customers. So if you have product people or you have salespeople that are having these conversations with these customers, if you're not listening to that first line, then bad decisions are going to end up being made because you're thinking that you just want your vision, right? Not everyone is Steve Jobs, and so it can definitely lead to a downfall. When you're looking at the egalitarian approach and the cons of it, especially at the early stages, that as soon as the organization starts getting bigger and bigger, trying to corral 15, 20, 25, 30 people to make a single decision, you just it ends up having decision paralysis. And it's a very negative kind of thing to try to, and very difficult to if you've ever tried to corral 30 people into making a decision. And so that's the other side of it. But they can both be useful at the very beginning when you're first starting. Eventually, you will have to move into the hierarchy, but it's kind of the whatever style you feel is best for the early stage team up to kind of 5 or 10 people.
Let's get into rewards. Why is it essential to have a discussion early on about rewards and equity with your co-founder?
Because it's another place for conflict. Rewards are super important, especially around the equity component. And so when I see 2 co-founders that have come in and they've just kind of started and I see a 50-50 split, what that communicates to me is that you didn't have a tough conversation. So nothing is ever 50-50 when co-founding. It's just not. One person generally will do more. And so the challenge with that is that if you split 50-50 and you have someone doing significantly more, it's going to start breeding resentment within the actual team. And that's not going to go well. It's where you start getting co-founder conflict and a lot of bad things happen to it. I've seen a lot of startups go down simply because of this kind of equity split piece. And so because this is a tough conversation, if it shows a good indication to investors like, hey, we've had this tough conversation. We went through ABC. This is how we ended up splitting the equity and why. Like having a good story behind it is great because it means that next time another tough decision comes up, I know that you will be able to have that tough conversation rather than trying to put it off for a later date and letting it fester.
What is a dynamic split and how can it be helpful in dividing equity between co-founders?
Yeah, so dynamic split is it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure how many people, and some people end up using it, but not everyone. A dynamic split is really honing down into the different phases of a startup in the very beginning. So if you look at it, so let's take a technology company, for example. in the first 3 months of a technology company, for 6 months, the engineer is going to be doing the majority of the work because you're building a product, right? The salespeople, they don't have anything to really sell yet. They might be able to take pre-orders and do some work. But the split there is going to be 90-10, 80-20, right? And so that's kind of phase one. But in phase two, maybe you have the salespeople going through and they're going out and selling, or you have HR trying to set up a bunch of policies around specific things. They're going to be either doing more work or about even maybe with the engineer. And then maybe in phase three, again, the salespeople are now off and running because the product is built. And so then it's 90-10 on the amount of work of actually starting the venture. And so the idea of a dynamic split is that you have good conversations around those kind of three phases, or around the couple of phases that the startup is going to end up going through, and you determine who's going to be doing what work at what stage and where, and you have the equity split based on those specific pieces of work within each phase. And so it's like, hey, maybe phase one is 40% of our total equity, and employee one or co-founder 1, 2, and 3 are, one's getting 20, one's getting 30, one's getting 50. And so it's kind of building a matrix across and really diving into the actual equity split, rather than just being like, oh, well, I'm going to do 60 and you do 40, just kind of off the bat.
Lucas, this information has been so great. Let's get into our last question. What are some items that should be included in co-founder contracts to avoid potential conflicts and issues?
Yeah. Morality clauses, probably. That'd be a good one. The main thing is a vesting schedule. So, putting it out for, say 4 years with kind of a 1-year cliff is a very standard thing for co-founders and for, employees. And so a vesting schedule is basically like, hey, you own 70% of this company, right? But, you only get awarded those pieces of equity, every month for the next 4 years. Your total will be 70 at the end of 4 years. But if you leave before then all that equity that has not been accumulated ends up disappearing. The idea of a cliff is that you don't get anything for the first year. And when you hit that year mark, everything that's accumulated then comes in. The reason that this is one of the most important pieces of an early stage startup is simply because you might have someone that is super excited about the idea. 6 months in, you guys realize that you're unable to work together, and all of a sudden they leave. Now, the challenge with that is that if they leave after 6 months and you've awarded them equity, they would walk away with that equity if you don't have a vesting schedule. And so it's to help prevent giving away part of the company for people that are not actively engaged in the actual company.
Lucas, thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, can you tell everyone how they can find you and learn more information about Tech Coast Angels?
Yeah, sure. So for Tech Coast Angels, it's just techcoastangels.la. On our website, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure my name will be somewhere below. It's super easy to get a hold of me. And for Spark, sparkxyz.io. Feel free to jump on. If you are an early stage startup, we've got a bunch of angel groups on there now where you can actually go in and apply to receive funding. So check us out on there.
Thank you for tuning in to Accelerate. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite streaming platform and on our YouTube channel. For more information on the Hollywood Chamber, please visit hollywoodchamber.net. Want to join us for our next HCC event? Network and mingle with Hollywood's leading business professionals, innovators, and creatives at some of the top-rated restaurants and venues in the area. Register for our monthly lunch hustle, speed leads, bash, and happy hour events at hollywoodchamber.net/events.